Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about lines, specifically the slope of a line. So let's get started. The slope of a line, which we can also describe as the ratio of rise to run, is written as slope is equal to rise divided by run, where rise is the change in y coordinates and run is the corresponding change in x coordinates between 2 points on the line. Don't worry if you don't quite understand this part of the description yet. You'll be able to understand it once the video is completed. So let's look at positive, negative, zero, and undefined slopes. The positive slope is when the rise or change in y coordinates is positive. In this case, we're thinking of an uphill slope. So let's look at this diagram. It's important to realize that whenever we're looking at diagrams of slopes, we're reading from left to right, or we're looking at the line from left to right, as if we were reading. So positive slope, we see that from left to right, the line is going uphill. This is also indicated by the rise being positive and the run being positive. But how do we know that the rise is positive and the run is positive? Well, if we look at rise, which is the change in y points, we see that we have a lesser y point here, as in probably -3, and then a higher y point over here, because this one is 3. Now, remember, if we're going from left to right and we see a trend of low to high, then we're going to have a positive outcome because our trend is going upward. Now let's look at run, the x points. So let's look at this point. This point is probably -3 on the x-axis. Now the end point, which is in line with this, is going to be +4. So if we're going from low to high again, with the run and the x points, we see that our outcome is going to be positive in both cases. And thus, we get a positive slope. Okay, now let's move on to negative. So our negative slope is when the rise or the change in y is going to be negative. Now we're thinking downhill. So let's look at our negative slope and reading from left to right again. In this case, we're going downhill because we're reading from left to right. And the graph also indicates that the rise is negative and the run is positive. Again, since we're going downhill, we have a higher y point over here because this one is going to be 3. But then on the other hand, we have a lower y point over here, -3. So if we're going from high to low, then we're going to have a negative outcome. But our run is still positive because our starting point is -3, and we're still ending up at +3. So we're going from low to high in our run, which means we get positive outcome, which means we overall have a negative slope. Okay, next up, zero. If we have any graph with a zero slope, we have a horizontal line. So let's first determine what our zero slope will look like. So this is our zero slope. It's a horizontal line. The way we determine it is, again, rise divided by run. But if we look here and see that there's no change in rise because it's just a horizontal line where the y points are all the same, our rise will become 0 divided by run, and therefore our slope will become 0. So, as determined here, our rise is equal to 0, but we also have a positive run, because we're starting out at a lower x point, -3, and we're going to a positive x point, +3. So our trend is low to high in x values, so our low to high run, but our change for y is going to be 0, ending us up with a 0 slope. Next, let's move on to undefined slopes. This one is basically the opposite of a zero slope. We have a vertical line. Just like we did with zero slope, if we have rise over run, but we have, okay, our rise is going to be the same. So we have rise divided by, but in this case, all of our values are going to be the same x point, -2. We don't see any change in the x values. So therefore, our run is going to be 0, ending us up with undefined, because anything that's divided by 0 is undefined and it'll come out as an error. Now, talking about rise, our rise can be positive or negative. It doesn't really matter because still, we're going in a vertical line, which means that it can be either positive or either negative. It's just we can't determine the slope of a line because we're dividing by 0 in this case. Okay, so now that we covered that, let's move on to a couple examples and the proper form of a slope of a line. So let's say you had point A, which consists of coordinates x1, y1, and point B, which consists of coordinates x2, y2 of a line. How would you find the slope using points A and B? Now this is the most important part because this is the actual formula for slope. If you didn't know, m is just the variable form or the variable term for slope. So m means slope. Slope is equal to rise over run, which we already know. And rise over run is equal to y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So basically what you're doing is you're taking the y-coordinate of point B and subtracting the y-coordinate of point A from that point. Then you're taking the x-coordinate of point A and you're subtracting that from the x-coordinate of point B. So you end up with y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. The most important thing to remember is that you can't have something like y1 minus y2 divided by x2 minus x1. I like to think of it as the 2's and the 1's always have to match up in their denominator place, and in their denominator and numerator position. So you can have y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1, or you can have, y1 minus y2 divided by x1 minus x2. So essentially, you can do the points of A minus B, you can do the points of B minus A, but it always has to be in the same order. So let's mark which one is correct. This one is correct. This one is correct. However, this one is going to be incorrect. We can't have it not matching up with the numerator and denominator places. Okay, let's do an example with this formula. Example, find the slope of a line that passes through the points A, 2, 1, and B, 8, 5. So first we set up that x1, y1 is equal to 2, 1. So what I just did was that I made the coordinates of A, the points x1 and y1. And then I made the coordinates of B, points x2 and y2. So this step was just setting up the parts of the formula. Now let's move on to actually plugging in the things to the formula. So we have our equation, slope is equal to y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Let's look at how to plug it in. So first we need to find y2. If we go up here, we see that our y2 point corresponds to 5. So we're going to plug that in right here. Then we go to find our y1 point. Our y1 point is going to be 1. So now we're going to plug that in right here. Now on to the denominator, our x2 point. I'll change the color. x2 is going to correspond to 8. So we're going to plug that in right here. And then our x1 point is going to correspond to 2. So we're going to plug that in right here. And if we solve for that, we get 4 divided by 6, which simplifies to 2 divided by 3, which is the slope of the line that consists of points A and B. Now the definition, if you think about it, is that for every 3 units moved to the right, so 3 is our run, 2 is our rise. Meaning that the change in x points is 3 and the change in y points is 2. So for every 3 units moved to the right, the line rises by 2 units. Okay? And here I just drew a diagram of the line. We can see that for every 3 units this line moves, it moves 2 units up. And it does the same thing over and over again. You can also see it here. And it forms triangles from which you can determine the slope of a line. Okay, so in the next video, we'll cover the different forms and equations of a line. Let's recap what we went over in this video. First of all, we started talking about what the basic definition of slope was, the ratio of rise to run, rise divided by run. Then we discussed the different types of slope, positive, negative, zero, and undefined. Then we went over the proper equation of slope, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Then we did an example using that formula. Finally, we looked at the graph based off of that example. And that sums up the lesson for today. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about lines from this video. Please share this with anybody who you think might be interested or might benefit from these videos, and recommend this channel to those people too. If you have any questions, please drop it in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you have any suggestions for the next videos, please comment them too. I'd love to see your feedback, so thank you all for watching these videos. I really appreciate all of the support. Thank you.